Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, I've been recording these sessions of the Eye for some years now, and one of the challenges each week is to find a new topic. But occasionally you have a major world event which imposes itself on you, and it becomes unavoidable to talk about it, to analyse it, and to try to figure out what it all means. And this has been one of those weeks, of course, with the Hamas attacks against Israel that started last Saturday and the international reaction. Now, as I speak, these attacks are still very much going on, together with the Israeli retaliation against Gaza. And all of you will be familiar with the casualty figures thus far, the humanitarian crisis. I don't need to repeat all that. So what I would like to focus on instead is what would we already be looking at as the strategic consequences of the Hamas attacks. What does it mean for Israel, for the Palestinians, and for the broader Middle East, and of course for the rest of us? Well, I think firstly, of course, we have to ask, why did Hamas attack when it did? It's speculation because, of course, we don't know the definitive answer. But some have suggested that Hamas was hoping to disrupt the normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, whereby the Saudis would join the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco in the so-called Abraham Accords, normalizing their relations with Israel. Of course, with the Israelis now bombarding Gaza, much more difficult for the Saudis to go ahead with this. Others have speculated that it's a gesture of despair because, of course, in recent years, the humanitarian situation of 2.5 million Palestinians locked up in the Gaza Strip, a territory the size of the Isle of Wight, has only got worse. And we've seen mounting violence between Palestinians and Israeli settlers on the West Bank too. 200 Palestinians have been killed so far this year, and some of the settlers. And some, particularly on the Palestinian side, interpret Hamas's response as a kind of outburst of violence against a Middle East peace process, which clearly has not been advancing for many years now. A third interpretation has been the hand of Iran. We have no proof that Iran actually pulled the trigger in terms of commanding the Hamas operation. Tehran has denied it, but what is indisputable, dear listeners, is that Iran for many years now has been bankrolling Hamas with not just money, but with weapons and with training, with intelligence, with organization. And Hamas could never have acquired 7,000 rockets and all of the fighters, well-armed fighters, to break into Israel without that long-standing Iranian support. But if you're an Israeli, you're probably less interested immediately in the why did Hamas act than the how did it act. Because for the Israelis, there are three fairly sobering conclusions. Number one, of course, is the intelligence failure. Israel has always prided itself on its well-admired intelligence services. And we would have thought that if Hamas had to take about 12 months to plan such a big operation, something would have leaked out that Shin Bet or Mossad or the military intelligence branch would have picked up on. So there will obviously be a fundamental review to figure out what went wrong. Were there signals? Probably yes. And if so, why were they not picked up? The second failure is one of security. Israel has invested billions in building walls and fences and watchtowers and electronic monitoring and sensor devices to stop groups like Hamas breaking into its territory. But the ease with which Hamas did break through in several places is something which, again, is going to force the Israelis to rethink many of their security arrangements. And the third failure is that the army was slow in responding, particularly in places like Sderot and Ashkelon, or on the border with the Gaza Strip, where many of the casualties were found. What happened there? Again, in a country which prides itself on its resilience and its speed in reacting to terrorist attacks. For the international community, there are also some questions that we need to grapple with. The first, of course, is to ensure that the Israeli reaction is proportionate, particularly in terms of the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, where already 260,000 Palestinians have been forced from their homes. And Palestinians claim today, for example, that already 1,000 Palestinians have died. We need to be mindful, of course, that the suffering is always on both sides, and the suffering of one does not justify the killing of others. And Israel in the past sometimes won a military victory only to lose in the court of public opinion by being seen to be responding in an undue, heavy-handed way. At the moment, quite rightly, Israel is the victim. It has the right of self-defense, as President Biden pointed out in his White House speech yesterday. Israel has declared a war on Hamas and wants to eradicate this very important threat to it. But how can the international community prevail upon Israel to somehow get the balance better between military action and trying to minimize civilian casualties and dealing with the humanitarian crisis as much as possible? It's not going to be easy, but because it's not easy doesn't mean to say that we can simply ignore it altogether. The second issue is preventing the war from spreading. There's been some firing across the border between the Israeli forces and Hezbollah in Lebanon, also between Syrian militias and Israel on the Golan Heights. I've spoken about Iran. We've seen in the past how quickly other Arab states could be pulled in to these conflicts, even if less, fortunately, today. And therefore, preventing an escalation of the conflict in the weeks ahead is going to be key. Israel cannot afford a war on multiple fronts. And frankly, the West, at a time when it needs to support Ukraine in its counter-offensive, cannot afford to divert all of its money, attention, and weapons away from Ukraine towards Israel, even though the United States and others clearly will have Israel's back. But we can understand that as well. So containing escalation. The third thing is to prevent an Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. This was done in the past with pretty bad results for Israel. Ariel Sharon, the Israeli Prime Minister, back in 2005, withdrew the Israel Defense Forces and the settlers from Gaza precisely because it was such a difficult area to police. Israel must make sure it doesn't go back to doing that. It's not a solution to the confrontation that we have seen. We also need to see with Israel what future security arrangements make sense for the country. For instance, is it wise to have cities very close to the border with Gaza, like Sderot and Ashkelon, which are very vulnerable if groups like Hamas break out? Is it wise to allow settlers to continue to expand on the West Bank if it only provokes more violence or crises with the Palestinians? Shouldn't we respect more the arrangements on the Temple Mount, where the holy sites are shared between the Jews and Muslims, again, to calm the situation and to withdraw from the government the bedrock of political support, which they're always counting on? Finally, Israel will be united as a result of the events over the last couple of days. We know that in recent months, with the massive demonstrations across Israel, that the country has been bitterly divided between the right and the left, between secularists and religious parties, over the reform of the judiciary, the future shape of the constitution, the destiny of the country. For a time being, those bitter divisions will be put aside, but the national unity is also something that Israelis need to use to take a deep look at their country, at their future, and at political arrangements in the region. What the events over the last couple of days have shown is that you cannot have a total security solution to political problems. You can't box it in and wall it in and hope it's going to go away. It will find a way of erupting against you. I'm not justifying Hamas in any way, quite the reverse, in terms of what it has done. But all of these events, of course, do point to the need to get some kind of political momentum and political dialogue going in the region. It's not impossible. The Abraham Accords between Israel and some of its erstwhile Arab enemies have shown the progress that can be made. But the only solution is a two-state solution. And although it's been deadlocked for a long period, we need to turn our minds once again. In the long run, once Israel is secure, once Hamas has been defeated and the extremists have been weakened, but nonetheless to turn our attention to more constructive politics and to finally look at how Israelis and Palestinians one day can live at peace and comfortably together in the same part of the world. That's all. Thank you for listening today, and I look forward to engaging with you next week.